Following the best practices is something you can't avoid, and it is always important to following the best practices. So in today's session, I'm going to discuss the REST API best practices. Doesn't matter which programming language you are using. It could be Node or it could be Java, it could be .NET, but you should always follow the best practices. The best practices which I'm going to discuss in this session is going to be applicable for pretty much most of the programming languages. So this is my series of videos like on the clean architecture with the .NET Core Web APIs microservices. And in case if you have missed any of my previous videos, it's recommended to watch those videos so that you will not be missing any of those. So I started with the fundamentals on the clean architecture where I discussed some of the clean architecture fundamentals. And the second chapter completely lab work where I created the project structure in the clean architecture way using the .NET Core Web API. In chapter number 3, discussed about the configurations, various configurations required for your APIs. And in chapter number 5, how do you store your secrets and how do you validate your health of the APIs. And in the last session, I've discussed the Azure App Services and also the Azure DevOps. So this is the series of videos I'm making. In case if you have missed any of these videos, it is recommended to watch those so that you will be able to understand when I'm actually referring some of the code base in my feedback service. So let's begin the session for the current video. This is the 7th session on the REST APIs. And I'm going to walk through step by step how I have followed these best practices in my source code, the code I'm creating, the working on the feedback service. So this is actually divided into 2 categories. In the first category, I will be pretty much talking about the best practices documentation. So I have created a separate documentation to talk about all different types of best practices. I will also discuss some of the fundamentals and then followed by the best practices. On the right side, I'm going to discuss some of the lab work which is implemented in the feedback service which I'm working on. So let's take a look at the document I created. This is my documentation on the best practices. So these are the different topics. Almost 14 best practices I covered, and some of the lab work we'll be discussing in this part of this document, part of the video. So as I mentioned before, understanding the best practice, always good to know what is the REST and some of the REST web API design. So if you look at any of the modern web applications, those are exposed APIs. It could be one or multiple APIs as a microservices, and interacting with the web applications or interacting with the client applications. And it should aim at least platform independence and service evaluation. So let's discuss what is the platform independence means. Any client should be able to call the API regardless of how the API is implemented internally. It doesn't matter which programming language you have used. So you could be using the React.js calling the .NET Core, or the ASP.NET MVC calling the REST API .NET Core, or the Node API, or the Java-based API. It doesn't matter. So the internal implementation details, you don't need to expose to the client. You don't need to tell anything about the client as long as you are following the standard protocol. Now, let's discuss what is the standard protocol, what is the format we are going to share between the client and service. So it says that agree upon the format, the data exchange between these 2 clients so that you can make the platform independent. And the second point is the service evaluation. The web API should be able to evolve and add functionality independently from the client application. So you should not be depending on the client applications when you are actually making the changes in your APIs. So that is something possible by doing the versioning, which we are going to discuss as part of the best practices. So this guide describes the issues that you should consider when designing the web APIs. As I mentioned, doesn't matter which programming language you are using. Now coming to the REST API, stands for the representational state transfer. It is a software architectural style created by Roy Fielding. So when I say the architectural style, it doesn't have a particular framework or particular pattern as such. So you can mold your APIs the way you are thinking. So that's where some of the principles, some of the best practices are very important, so that we are actually maintaining the consistency across all the REST APIs. Any API, which is application programming interface, that follows the REST design principle is said to be RESTful service. So when you call the RESTful service, that means it follows the REST API design principles. What are those principles? Then let's discuss some of these principles. So REST APIs are designed around resources. When I say resources, it could be object, it could be service, it could be data, which is actually accessed by the client. And then resource has an identifier. Here, the uniform resource identifier, which is actually unique across the API. Each API endpoint within the API is unique. And the next principle is the representation. So it could be JSON format, it could be XML format, it could be plain text format. So as I mentioned previously, the client and service agrees upon the representation. So this is one of the design principles. REST APIs use the uniform interfaces. The uniform interfaces here, like HTTP words, like get, post, put, patch, delete, and these are some of the uniform interfaces. REST APIs use the stateless request model. So when I say the stateless, service and client. So the client is for example, the React website. My API is the .NET Core Web API. So those two are always stateless. Once the UI sends a request to the service will process. So client will not be having any dependency on that call. That's the stateless. And also REST APIs are cacheable data. So you can cache that to improve the performance of the APIs. So the constraints of the REST API, the REST architectural style affect the following architectural properties. For example, the performance. If you are adding the caching to your API, your performance of the API will be boosting up. So it all depends on what are the different constraints added in your REST APIs. Scalability, for example, if you are adding the versioning, then you can support the scalability. Simplicity, for example, if you are following those best practices for managing the uniform interfaces. Modifiability, visibility, and portability. So some of these definitions you can look at that. So those are all going to be coming part of the best practices. If you are ignoring the best practices, that means you're compromising on these architectural properties. So that's why it is very, very important to follow all the best practices as much as possible, so that across the world is consistent on when they are creating the REST APIs. So let's start with the semantics of HTTP methods, where what kind of status codes will be returned by each HTTP method. The HTTP methods, you see the get, put, delete, post, head, patch options. These are the HTTP methods we normally use in the REST services, and you have the description. When I say REST returns the current value of an object. Put is used for modifying, deleting an object. Post for creating an object. Head for returning the metadata of an object for a get response, for example. Patch is apply a partial update to an object. Options get the information about the request. So you can look at the wiki for more detailed information. But what is idempotent, what is not? Idempotent is something when you are actually trying to invoke an API call. If you are calling once or more than once, the response structure, the object structure will not be changed in the idempotent. So for example, get, put, delete, these are idempotent, but post is not idempotent. The same thing with the patch is also not idempotent. The rest of them are idempotent. Now let's take a look at the details of each method and compare the service which I have created, how those API endpoints returning the response objects, response status code, sorry. For example, the get method, when you are creating the API endpoint with the get HTTP, you should have two status codes, either 200 or 404. So 200, it returns the status code OK. But if, let's say, you are trying to get something which is not existing in the database, you can return the 404, not found status. Let me take a look at the source code which I've working on for the feedback service and compare whether I am returning the right status codes for the right API endpoint. For example, the get here, if I find a response get all, this is returning the response, and in this I will be returning the feedback object. If I don't get the response feedback, then I will be returning not found. Otherwise, I will be returning OK, which is 200. So if you see in the method, I have decorated with the 200 with 404. This is for not found 404. I've also included these two methods because I'm going to add the authentication and authorization functionality or a feature to this service. In that case, I will be using these two. So I've added these two in advance. And this is anyway required to say that if there are any errors while getting the feedbacks, you will be returning the 500 internal error. Now let's go back to the post method. If the post method creates a new resource, it returns the status code 201, which says that the new object is created. So the new URI of the resource ID is included in the location header of the response. So when you make an API call, you should also return the location of the new object which is actually created in the database. So that's the best practice for create objects. So let me see if I have added those. So here in the create API endpoint, I have decorated with the 201 to say that which is created. So this one returns the 201 bad request, then unauthorized and forbidden. So the bad request, if the object, the input you are passing is null, has some issues, then we'll be returning the bad request. For example, here the bad request is applicable. Here the bad request is not applicable because there is no input. So bad request here I'm including because if I pass the 0 or less than 0 negative value, then I want to return the bad request. So depending on what status codes you are returning inside the method, so you should be decorating with here so that this will be included in the Swagger documentation. So this is a Swagger documentation, for example, in the case of get. So the consumer knows that this, whoever is using this service knows that these are the possible status codes the service API endpoint will be returning. 200 for the success scenario, 401 in case of unauthorized, in case of 403 it's a forbidden. I'm going to explain the difference between the unauthorized and the forbidden and which one to use, which scenario as part of the authorization section. 404 not found and server error. So server error is something you will be including pretty much for every API endpoint. Now see the difference between the get and post. In case of post, I have a 201. I also written some description here, returns the newly created item. How that is possible? For the create, I had to decorate this property response code 201 to say whatever the description you want to add. In case of 400, whatever the description you want to add it, you can add it here. So that this is the kind of a extending the documentation for the API endpoint for the consumers so that they are very clear on what they are consuming. So this is about the create API endpoints. Let's go back to the documentation. If the method does some processing but does not create a new resource, method can return the 200. If you have if my API endpoint here is straightforward, but your API as part of the create doing a lot of things, so probably you may want to return 200 status code and continue processing the API, the backend thread. So in that case, you might need to return the 200, but it is also possible to return the 200. Just wanted to know. If there is no result to return, the method can return the status code 204 also. So those are the best practices can be followed when you are actually writing the post method, depending on the need. Now look at the put. Put can also return the 201 when it is actually creating as part of the put. That is rarely we will be doing, but otherwise it should be written 200 or 204 when you are updating. In my scenario for the update, which is the put, I am returning the status codes. One is okay, 200. Instead of returning the 204, I'm returning the 200 because I think depending on your organization standards, you can define that I'm okay with returning the 200 in case of the put instead of the 204. But if you are following the 204 pattern, then let's follow one consistent pattern, because I think between 200 to 204, there is no clear instruction in the HTTP status codes, what is the right or what is not. And in case of the delete, for example, I am returning the no contents once it is deleted successfully. If not able to find the object which I'm planning to delete, I can return not found. Accordingly, I have decorated all these status codes for the Swagger documentation. So this is the best practice one. Now moving to the second best practice, which is the API versioning. API versioning is something I've discussed in my second chapter or third chapter, where you need the API versioning for your API so that when the project size get increased or your API endpoints get increased or your consumers got increased and you had to make a changes in the schema in terms of the structure or the specific action, then you will be in trouble in case if you are not following the API versioning. So there are different ways to do the API versioning, and you don't need to do the API versioning in some scenarios like you are creating a small kind of POCs or small internal applications, but that's not recommended. So as I mentioned, the rest is the architectural style, doesn't force anything, doesn't mean that you don't need to follow that. It's always best practice. It is always good to follow the best practices. So in my service, the feedback service, I'm following the URI versioning, so there are pros and cons depending on your need. You can follow either query string versioning or the header versioning. So the difference between these three is in the URI versioning, you will be seeing the version number in the URI. That means if you are creating a new endpoint, for example, feedbacks, this is my V1 and this is my V2. If I go to my Swagger, I've already enabled the versioning here. If I switch to the V2, I can see this is my V2. In the source code, I have V1 and V2, and I have created a separate controller for V1 and V2. And from the V2 onwards, you can decide, you can define your code structure, how that should look like for V1 versus V2. That is really, the detailed one. There is no, the rules as such to define it. But this is what I'm following for URI for the API versioning. The other way to do is the query string versioning. In the query string, you can say that version equal to 2, 3, 4. If you have not passed, for example, any of the versioning, then the default should be considered as a 1. So that's how you can define inside the code for the query string versioning. And the last one is the header versioning. So in the header versioning, you can create the custom header the way you want. For example, custom hyphen header, and then pass the value API hyphen version equal to 1, API version equal to 2 and 3, so on. So this is one way of implementing the versioning. In this case, if you see the URL, the base URL or the API endpoint URI will not be changed. It is always going to be consistent across multiple versions. And depending on the custom headers can be changed. So if you have exposed for the customer 1, they are using the version 1. If you have exposed to the different customer with the modified one, then you can change that to, you can call it as a version 2 and version 3, so on. That's all about the API versioning, which is the second best practices in my documentation. The next one is name collection using the plural nouns. That's one of the best practices in the REST API, so that we are actually managing the consistency across the globe. So for example, these are what is correct and what is incorrect. You can look at here. If you see the feedback, and here incorrect way of decorating is the feedback. So if you take a look at my API endpoints, these are all following the plural instead of the singular for the connections. So the way you have to do is you have to when you are creating the constructor. So I have created the constructor in the plural so that it has the consistency for the pluralizer. The next best practice is accept and respond with the JSON object. So this is something you can decorate in the API endpoint. If I go to the API, you see the producers, the JSON. If I don't keep that, by default, it includes the JSON, XML, plain text, and so on. But in my case, if I want to restrict to my clients access through the JSON only, that's how you will be decorating. So JSON stands for the JavaScript Object Notation. Is the easiest programming language format, not a programming language. So the key features of the JSON is easy to parse, support for most of the frameworks, and can be used any programming languages. So the way you can see what kind of content type you will be supporting, that is something is you can see it in the JSON, in the Swagger. For example, if you see only application/JSON will be displayed, because that's how I decorated in the controller action. Next best practice is the use nouns instead of the verbs. So when you are actually working on the REST services, I would like to give some background on the WCF services. When you are creating the WCF service, you will always say create feedback or delete feedback. So those are the verbs, not the nouns. But where it comes to the REST APIs, you already have the HTTP methods like get, put, post, delete. These are already telling what you are doing as part of the API endpoint. So you don't need to redundant, or you don't need to duplicate the same. Instead, you can, since you already decorated those HTTP methods, you can just use the nouns. That's the best practice, one of the best practice in the REST APIs. For example, if you see my API endpoint is API/v1/feedback. I don't say get feedback or create feedback in the URI itself. So that's the use nouns instead of the verbs. Now, these are some of the REST verbs and actions and success status codes and the failure status codes. These are something we discussed in the first one, but it's in the table format. For example, the get will always return 200, if not found 404. And for example, options 200, failure is not applicable. Post 201, and in case of not found or conflict during the create, while updating, you can say 200 or 204. And if not found, you can say 404. Same thing with the delete. So these are the, what is what should be written in case of the, what status code should be written in case of the success, what status code should be written in case of the failure. So in a table format. The next best practice is the nesting the resources. So for example, if I have a feedbacks for a comments collection, for example, if I want to return the comments for a particular feedback, so until here, I'm talking about a particular feedback and then followed by the comment. So this is a nested resources naming convention for the URI. The next one is the return status codes. I think pretty much we talked about in this table format, but these are the possible return status codes. OK always returns the success status codes for pretty much all the REST HTTP methods. 201 for create, used for the post. 204 no contents, used for delete, for example. Bad request, this means the client side input fails the validation. And unauthorized and forbidden, these are related to the security. 404 not found, pretty much used for the couple of endpoints here you see. And then 422 unprocessable entity should be used if the server cannot process the input coming from the client. And 500 is can be decorated for all the endpoints to return the internal server error. 502 bad gateway. This is at the service level, server level. This indicates that the invalid response from the upstream server. Server is not responding or something wrong with the server. 503 is the server unavailability. Service is not working as expected. Server is not working as expected, and you will be getting the 503 service unavailable messages. So these are the kind of status codes can be returned part of the REST API endpoint. So you will see some of these 500 internal error, server error in my middleware component. So I've created the middleware component to return the custom error message. For example, if you are running, I need to discuss this topic in details. Maybe I can cover this in the next one. So let me go to the next one and then come back to the custom errors and the exception handling. So here, allow filtering, sorting, pagination. This is one of the best practices in the REST API world to make sure that we are not actually hitting the server and waiting for ever to respond. Otherwise, we end up burning the resources and wasting the resource time. Just imagine you have written an API endpoint. It has to hit the database, which has millions of rows, and it is trying to actually fetch the data, fighting with the database to get that data. So that's not a best practice. You should always follow the filtering, sorting, pagination in those kind of scenarios to make sure that you are not actually hitting the server badly. So in this case, these are the different type offers you can use. REST API offers different types of filtering options, for example, filtering, sorting, pagination, and the field selection. So in case of the filtering, so you can use, say, country equal to UK. So inside the repository, you will be applying the where condition to filter the data, making sure that you are actually following the SQL injection patterns in this particular case, and then fetching the data. That's how you can be filtering. For example, in case of the date properties, will be filtered by using like this. So it's always good to follow the filtering. So there I will show you end of the video some of the references where you can get more details on this particular topic, especially allow filtering, sorting, and the pagination. One of the Microsoft blog where they strictly follow. I worked on the LDAP APIs. They strictly follow these filtering to process the request thoroughly. Sorting, you can say sort by the column name, colon, ascending or descending. and your service API will able to understand this. So I'm going to create one of the API endpoints specially for this particular best practice to explain. As of now, in my feedback service, I don't have such examples, but that is something you can expect in my next video, how the sorting, filtering, and searching, including the pagination, will be applied at the API level. When it comes to the pagination, there are two categories of pagination: server side service driven pagination, or the client driven pagination, where you can have skip and top kind of functionalities. As I mentioned, I'm going to skip some of these descriptions and going to cover in details when I actually add the API endpoint which supports the pagination with the demo. And same thing with the field selection. The next best practice is always following the security best practices, more than important, because it's actually it's a critical to your service if you're not following some of these best practices, especially the SSL certificate. It's not too difficult to load into the server, and it's most of the time free or very less price. So make sure that you are decorating or enable the SSL for your service. Some of these pictures I taken from the Azure service, where you can select for example, the custom domain, where you can say HTTPS only on, toggle that on, and the same thing with TLS or SSL settings. You can select the on, and the latest version of TLS you can select from the Azure services. So you can configure these things even in the service itself or in the Azure service itself. And the next one, so I will be talking about the authorization feature separately, adding the authorization feature, decorating the authorization feature, and apply those authorizations at the API endpoint level. So those are some of the security best practices should be followed. So I will be discussing on the token authorization token implementation for the microservices or the API endpoint. That will be one of my future video. And the next best practice, again, I'm going to implement the caching feature also. Cache the data to improve the performance. It is always best practice to add the caching, especially that the data is not going to be refreshed like a couple of hours or couple of days or the day. Then it is always good practice to add the caching. So include the cache, and let's say it will expire after 1 day. If my data is not refreshed on daily basis, it's good to have the caching so that you can skip the database call, cache this either in Redis or in memory. So Redis is recommended. I am going to have one more video on the caching, as I mentioned, the authorization part separately, and the searching, sorting, and the filtering also. The next best practice in the REST API is the HATEOAS. It is also called HATEOAS, which is actually, let me get the full form. So HATEOAS stands for Hypermedia as the engine of application state. So what does that mean is, so one of the primary motivation behind the REST is that it should possibly navigate the entire set of resources without prior knowledge of the URI schema. So when you are actually making the API HTTP GET request, it should return the information which is related and find the resources related directly to the requested object. So let me go more in details to explain what does that mean. So if you take a look at this diagram, so let me see if I can bring this in the service. If I go to my service, for example, this is my service. When I click on this JSON object, the Swagger by default coming up with this HATEOAS, which is actually giving all the description, the details of the URIs. If I take an feedback service, for example, these are my tags, summary, description, and the operation ID responses it returns, and C also includes some of the references. So these are called the HATOAS, which is hypermedia as the engine of application state. So this is one of the best practice. Make sure that this is included in your API documentation. In this case, I have this in my the Swagger JSON object. So I'm following that best practices, I would say. Another best practice is API documentation. Without API documentation, it is really difficult for the consumers to understand what is API actually do. So the API documentation can be exposed. Luckily, we are lucky that this Swagger supports heavy documentation. So for example, you can write all your documentation here. You can say, mention all these things so that you can expose this to the consumer, and consumers should be able to understand. But imagine that you are a backend developer, there is a front-end developer, like UI developer. They only understand the React. If you give the URL of the service, they should be able to go through the service. In fact, you can write a lot of information here itself. Instead of managing the separate Word document for the API, it is always recommended to have enough documentation on the Swagger itself. So that's the API documentation best practices. The documentation should contain the relevant endpoints of the APIs, which is part of the Swagger. Examples, for example, if I go to feedback, I'm going to talk about this nice feature here. Earlier, I used to decorate that here, but now if I don't need to search for this post object somewhere, it is automatically populated in my text box so that I can quickly use this for testing. So that is the one of the automated way of examples. I will talk about that. Implementation in several programming languages, messages listed in different errors. So these are all part of the Swagger, which we are working on. The next API endpoint is the rate limit. So this is something, for example, if you want to avoid somebody abusing your APIs and hitting it badly for multiple times, you are going to pay for the resources. So to avoid that, you can, this is something available out of the box in the API management, which you can expose, or you can have to configure that inside the service itself, but that is a custom way of doing. Unfortunately, there is no out of the box feature for the rate limit, which is something, as I mentioned, possible by configuring the API management policies. But it is good to have so that you're actually preventing hitting badly or your API. The last one is authentication and authorization. So one of the best practice I will be talking about in the subsequent videos. So these are my references for following these 13, 14 best practices. These are all really nice best practices. So one of the reference I was talking about, which is really good, created by Microsoft, REST API guidelines. If you see, this is a huge documentation and it's a really good documentation. Especially I'm interested in learning in the filtering concepts, which I'm going to implement that in my next video, applying the filtering when you are working on the API, which has to return the multiple pages and the data. So I'm trying to see filter. See, this is something I really like about the filter the operations. You can use these kind of operations inside the code, and your service understand when the filter coming with these operations and code it accordingly inside your service. This is about the web API implementation guide, and this talks about the RESTful web design and some of the examples, how I created, and so on. So you can look at these articles which I referred for following the best practices. It's always good to have your own the documentation like the way I'm working on here, so that you, when you go to the internet, you will find plenty of these documents, but it's really difficult. What is applicable to you, what is not, that is something you will be defining in your organization level, and make sure that those are used and followed when you are actually coding. Now, switch to the next one. As I mentioned, this video has two parts. The first part is the theory, and the second part is the lab work. So now I'm going to show what I have done, part of the lab work from these best practices. So let's take a look at the second part of the video, which is like covering some of these best practices. The first point is don't return plain text. So how do we handle those not to return the plain text? So I followed some of the best practices from this website. So here it talks about format specific action results, and also content negotiation, also accept headers, browser and content negotiation, and format things like that. So this is the best way to start with. So I have decorated some of the changes. So I'm going to discuss the difference between what changes I have made as compared to the previous one. So this is my the comparison since, so almost 12 commits I made on 18 files since the last session, and these are something I will be discussing as part of this, but very particular about this not written the plain text. So in order to do that, I think I talked about this. So you will be decorating this with the producers and every controller action. So I've decorated that even here too. It produces the application/JSON. So you are telling your consumer that my API endpoint will support only application/JSON. And that's what you can see in the REST API. So if you go here, any of the API endpoints, you can see only application/JSON. And the next one, I will go with this document, add Newtonsoft JSON, adding the Newtonsoft JSON for serialize and deserialize in the ASP.NET Core. So earlier we used to have the JSON.NET. So now the JSON.NET has been removed after the .NET Core 3.0 onwards. So the new lightweight version of the deserialization is using the system.text.json. So I've used the system.text.json to which is the lightweight version, which is Microsoft is recommending to use for the serialize and deserialize the object. So that is something you will see it in the startup.cs file and Newtonsoft JSON file. So let me quickly open my startup.cs. So if you see, this is something I've been added since the last session, and I've also added something for serializing enum as a string. So this is something I noticed that in the new library system.text.json, when you are converting from your object to enum type, it is always converting into integer, not the actual value. So in order to fix that, I have had to add this piece of code, which basically serialize the with the serialize options. So these are the two lines of code I've added since last change. And the exception handling. So this is the one of the topic I want to discuss a little bit more in details. I'm sure in my previous sessions also I've discussed about how do you handle your exceptions thoroughly. So one of the best practices we were talking about returning the right status code when the exception happens in your code. So I've injected this particular middleware to address the custom exceptions. So locally, you may want to see the actual error which is triggered. For example, let me get some errors here. So if I want to, let's say, see how the exception looks like. This is how my exception looks like locally, but I don't want to throw the same exception to the end user. Rather, I will be throwing the user-friendly exception instead of throwing the stack trace with all these exceptions. So those can be addressed centralized way by using the middleware component. So that is something has been implemented here. So I've corrected some of the status codes, like, earlier this was something else, and I also corrected this one. So all those details are in my previous pull request, for example, in the HTTP status code. So this particular middleware component nicely returns the response code, including all these components, all these headers, for example, so that it is easy for the consumer to understand how the exception has been thrown by the service. So since last change, I've corrected the, as I mentioned, this middleware component, and also these were added part of the deployment, so you can ignore that. So these are the profile files when you are deploying the source code from your Visual Studio to the Azure. These will be added in your project. And I've also added another feature called extending Swagger documentation. So in order to extend the documentation, I had to follow 3 steps. The extended documentation, for example, here I was talking about automatically pre-populating your request body in this text box, so that you don't need to type explicitly when, especially this kind of scenario. So you will be saving a lot of time during the development debugging. So if it is the response object is already automatically coming here. How we can do that? There are 3 steps we need to follow. One is adding the NuGet reference from the Swashbuckle ASP.cover filters, and second one, actually creating the classes, just like in case of create, for example. So this is my create and returning the create object, right? So the feedback is the create object. So just like this feedback object, I have created another folder called Swagger example, request and response. And then inside the request, I've added this new class called feedback request example, which is exactly the same. And this is what you will be able to see in your the text box in the request body. So you will have to create a new class, which is inherited from iExample provider. And this is especially for this feedback class. So this feedback request example is exactly going to be pre-populated in your Swagger. This is called the extended Swagger documentation. Finally, you need to configure the startup.cs. If you go to the startup.cs, you will have to configure that. I think I have done that in the dependency injection. Let me see my pull request. So as I mentioned, this is a new class being added here. Same thing for the response object. I've added one more. So I'm looking for the, give me 1 second, Swagger configuration. So these are the 2 lines you need for that extended Swagger documentation. Sorry, I was not able to figure out this. And in my startup.cs, I discussed these are the 2 things added. I've also improved the API documentation to make it more user-friendly. And in my project, I have added the Newtonsoft. I've added the Swashbuckle filter for extended documentation. and rest of them are pretty much related to the status code, for example. So if you look at the delete here written, I corrected a few things to make sure that when you are finding an object, if you are not able to find that in the database, return false. Since this returns false from the repository, and the controller will look at if it is a true or false, and depending on the true or false, this delete API endpoint return the right status code. So I have to correct few things here to make sure that the right status code is written from the API endpoint. So that's all for now. I think I'm going to continue this journey. As I mentioned, this is my 7th video, and it is consistent. So in case if you have missed those previous sessions, it is important to understand so that you will be able to follow my videos. So this is the first one. This is the second one. I'm trying to improve the documentation and also trying to improve if I missed anything. So as part of the sequence, so I will be sometimes doing the back and forth. Just bear with me. But the goal is to make the API clean, following the rest of the best practices, following industry standards with the enough documentation, and that's the goal. And hope this is helpful. So I will be adding the details in the description below the video. If you want the actual source code, if you want the actual the access to the Azure or the DevOps or any kind of the documentation, so feel free to send me an email so that I can look at those requests. Thank you very much.